Elias Harlan was 15 years old, riding in a boxcar through the mountain pass when the blizzard hit. The train stopped for 3 hours while the storm raged outside, and Elias watched through a crack in the wooden slats as the world turned white and deadly. But inside the boxcar, he was dry. The curved metal roof shed the snow like water off a duck's back. The walls blocked the wind completely. The space wasn't warm exactly, but it wasn't killing cold either. A shell, Elias said to himself. The train car is like a shell around us. His dog, a shepherd named Duke, lifted his head at the sound of his voice. Duke had been with Elias for 2 years now, ever since they'd both been abandoned, Elias by a father who drank too much, Duke by owners who moved away and left him tied to a fence post. They'd found each other. They'd survived together. And now Elias was thinking, what if I built a shell around a cabin? He wondered aloud. Something big enough to cover the whole thing, keep the snow off, and block the wind, like armor for a house. Duke's tail thumped against the boxcar floor. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. His human was planning something. Planning meant building. Building meant purpose. 3 months later, they arrived in Cold Creek, Montana. Elias had $17, a bag of tools, and an idea that everyone said was the stupidest thing they'd ever heard. They were wrong. Montana Territory, August 1891. The town of Cold Creek had seen plenty of young drifters come through. Boys running from something or toward something, looking for land or gold or a fresh start. Most lasted 1 winter and fled back east with frostbitten fingers and broken dreams. Elias Harlan didn't look any different from the rest. 15 years old, thin but wiry with calloused hands and watchful eyes. The dog at his side was the only thing that made people look twice. "That's a fine animal," said Henry Wallace, who ran the general store and served as the town's unofficial welcome committee. "Shepherd, isn't he?" "Yes, sir. His name's Duke." "And what brings you to Cold Creek, son?" "Looking to homestead. Heard there's land available up on the North Ridge." Henry's eyebrows rose. "The North Ridge? That land's available because nobody wants it. Too exposed. The wind up there will freeze you solid before Christmas." "I know about the wind," Elias said calmly. "I have a plan for it." "A plan?" Henry chuckled. "Son, men twice your age with 10 times your money have tried to build on that ridge. The snow buries everything. The wind tears apart anything the snow doesn't bury. What kind of plan could a 15-year-old boy possibly have?" "I'm going to build a shell." "A what?" "A steel arch over my cabin. Like a roof over a roof. The arch takes the snow and the wind. The cabin underneath stays protected." Henry stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. Not meanly, but with genuine disbelief. "Son, that's either the smartest thing I've ever heard or the craziest." He shook his head. "Probably both." "Probably," Elias agreed. "But I'm going to do it anyway." The land cost him $12 of his $17. Nobody else wanted the North Ridge parcel, 40 acres of exposed hillside that caught every storm rolling through the valley. The previous 3 owners had abandoned it, leaving behind foundations of cabins collapsed under snow load or torn apart by wind. Elias walked the property his first day, Duke padding beside him, studying the failures of those who'd come before. "They built too light," he said, examining a collapsed roof beam, "and too exposed. No windbreak, no protection, just cabins sitting in the open like targets." Duke sniffed the rotted wood, then looked up expectantly. "We're going to do it different, boy. We're going to build a cabin that can't be touched." The first step was the arch. Elias had seen curved steel structures in railroad yards, storage buildings made of corrugated metal panels bolted together into a half-cylinder shape. They were ugly but incredibly strong, designed to shed snow and resist wind loads that flattened conventional buildings. He couldn't afford to buy one, but he could build one. The steel came from a failed mining operation 20 miles north. The mine had closed 2 years ago, leaving behind equipment, buildings, and piles of corrugated steel panels nobody wanted. Elias offered the caretaker $3 for as much steel as he could haul. The man laughed and told him to take whatever he could carry. It took Elias 6 weeks to transport it all. He made the trip 17 times, loading his small wagon with steel panels, dragging it behind a mule borrowed in exchange for labor, and hauling materials up the ridge one agonizing load at a time. The panels were heavy and awkward, cutting his hands through work gloves and threatening to slide off on every steep trail section. The work nearly broke him. On the 4th trip a panel sliced his glove and opened his palm to the bone. He stitched it himself with thread and a heated needle, biting a stick while Duke whimpered beside him. On the 9th trip the wagon wheel cracked. He carried panels on his back, 3 at a time, 200 pounds of steel across 3 miles of mountain trail. His shoulders bled where edges dug in. On the 15th trip a thunderstorm caught him in the open. He huddled under the wagon with Duke, watching lightning split trees 100 yards away, wondering if he'd survive to finish. But he kept going. Every morning he woke sore and exhausted. Every morning he loaded the wagon again. "One more trip," he told Duke. "Just one more. Then we rest." But one more always became another, because the arch in his mind wouldn't build itself, and nobody else was going to do it for him. Duke walked beside him on every trip, sometimes running ahead to scout the path, sometimes falling behind to investigate interesting smells, but always returning, always present. "Good boy," Elias would say during rest breaks, sharing his water with the dog. "We're getting there. Slow but steady." By the end of September, he had enough steel to build an arch 40 feet wide and 60 feet long. Now he just had to figure out how to put it together. The townspeople came to watch. Word had spread about the crazy boy on the North Ridge, the one building something nobody could quite identify. They rode up in ones and twos, curious, skeptical, and ready to witness failure. "What in God's name is that supposed to be?" asked Thomas Reed, the town's most successful rancher. He sat on his horse at the edge of Elias's property, staring at the partially assembled arch frame. "Looks like a whale skeleton." "It's a shelter," Elias replied without pausing his work. He was on a ladder, bolting curved steel ribs to the concrete anchors he'd poured. "When it's done, I'll build my cabin inside it." "Inside it?" Thomas laughed. "Boy, you're building a barn and then putting a house in the barn." "Something like that. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're doing twice the work for the same result." "Not the same result." Elias climbed down the ladder to face the rancher. "When the blizzards come, your cabin roof has to hold all that snow. Your walls have to block all that wind. If they fail, you freeze." He gestured at the arch rising behind him. "My cabin won't have to do any of that. The arch handles the snow. The arch handles the wind. The cabin just has to be a cabin." Thomas shook his head. "And when your arch collapses, when all that steel comes crashing down on your little cabin, the arch won't collapse. This design holds up locomotive sheds. It's held up worse than Montana winters." "We'll see about that." Thomas turned his horse to leave. "Don't come crying to me when you're buried under your own foolishness, boy." He rode away without looking back. Elias returned to his work. October brought the frame's completion and the cabin's beginning. The arch stood finished now, a massive half-cylinder of corrugated steel, open at the front, closed at the back, anchored to concrete footings 4 feet deep. It looked strange against the Montana landscape, an industrial intrusion into wilderness, but it was solid. When Elias stood inside and looked up at the curved ceiling 40 feet above, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: safe. "Now comes the easy part," he told Duke, who had claimed a spot near the arch entrance as his supervisory position. "Building a cabin is simple. I've watched it done." He hadn't actually built one alone, but he had books, time, and the arch giving him shelter. He could work through rain, early snow, and weather that would have halted any outdoor construction. The shell protected him while he built. The cabin took shape through October and November, log walls rising inside the steel cocoon, a peaked roof that didn't need to bear snow because the arch did, windows and a door, and a chimney venting through a gap left in the arch's peak. He built it bigger than he needed because he had the space. 2 rooms instead of 1, a loft for storage, and even a proper porch, though the porch was inside the arch and would never feel rain or snow. Then came the firewood. Elias understood the arch wasn't just shelter, it was storage. All that protected space along the walls, the gaps between the cabin and the curved steel shell, could hold enough wood to last years instead of months. He began cutting in late November, felling trees from his land, splitting logs until his arms burned and his back screamed. Duke dragged smaller branches while Elias hauled heavy sections on a makeshift sled. By December he had stacked firewood from floor to ceiling on both sides of the cabin. Massive walls of split logs that turned the gaps into solid barriers. Anyone looking at the arch from outside would see wood, and more wood, with just the cabin door visible between 2 mountains of fuel. "That's enough wood to last 3 winters," Henry Wallace observed during one visit, jaw dropping at the sight. "That's the idea," Elias said, wiping sweat from his face despite the cold. "Never want to be caught without. Most folks just cut what they need for the season. Most folks haven't seen what a real winter can do." Elias's voice was quiet but firm. "I have. I won't be caught unprepared. Not ever." The townspeople kept coming to watch. Their skepticism slowly shifted, not quite to belief, but to curiosity and interest. "I still think you're crazy," Henry Wallace said on one visit, watching Elias install windows. "But I'm starting to think you might be crazy like a fox." "Is that a compliment?" "I'm not sure yet." December brought the first real test. The storm rolled in on December 14th, a howling monster the old-timers called the worst in 20 years. Wind speeds that could knock a man down, snow falling so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, temperatures plunging to 30 below zero. Elias was inside his cabin when it struck. He heard the wind slam into the arch, a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the steel. He heard snow piling on the curved roof above, then sliding off the sides exactly as designed. He heard the sounds of a blizzard trying its hardest to kill everything in its path. And inside his cabin, inside his arch, he was warm. The stove burned steadily, heating the small space comfortably. The cabin walls held firm, unbuffeted by wind because the arch blocked it completely. Snow wasn't piling on his roof, wasn't threatening collapse, and wasn't slowly burying him alive. Duke lay by the stove, completely unconcerned, tail thumping occasionally when Elias glanced his way. "We did it, boy," Elias said softly. "We actually did it." The storm lasted 3 days. Elias spent them reading, cooking, tending the fire, and moving firewood from the massive stacks along the arch walls. He had enough dry wood stored in that protected space to last 3 winters, all accessible without stepping into the killing cold. On the morning of December 17th, the storm broke. Elias opened his cabin door, walked through the sheltered arch to its entrance, and stepped outside. What he saw stopped him cold. The world lay buried, drifts 15 feet high in places, buildings covered, roads erased, the landscape transformed into a white desert. Trees stood bent or broken. The sky was clear blue, but the temperature was still 20 below. In the distance, smoke rose from the valley, not chimney smoke, but the dark, ominous kind. He learned what it meant when Thomas Reed appeared at the arch 2 hours later. The rancher looked nothing like the proud man who had mocked Elias's project months ago. Face raw with frostbite, horse stumbling with exhaustion, eyes hollow with shock. "The town," Thomas gasped, sliding from the saddle. "The town is destroyed." "What happened?" "The general store collapsed, the weight of the snow. The roof gave way, and the stove fire spread before the snow smothered it. Half the town are homeless. No room, no food." He trailed off, staring past Elias at the arch, the intact cabin inside, the towering stacks of firewood, and the shelter untouched by the storm. "My God," he whispered. "It worked. It actually worked. How many need shelter?" 14, maybe more. Women, children, and families who lost everything. Elias didn't hesitate. "Bring them here. Here." Thomas looked around the vast interior. "There's not enough room. There's more room than they have now. The arch stays warm just from being enclosed, 30 degrees in here even without fire. We can set up bedding, share food, and share heat. It won't be comfortable, but they'll be alive." Thomas stared at the boy he had dismissed as a fool. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you help us? We laughed at you." "I laughed at you because you need help," Elias said simply. "Everything else is just noise." By nightfall, 18 people sheltered in Elias's arch, not in the cabin itself, which remained his private space and reward for months of labor, but in the open protected area around it. Bedrolls and blankets covered the floor, and a second stove burned in the center, fed from the seemingly endless firewood stacks. Elias organized cooking, rationed supplies, and created order that kept everyone warm and fed while the town struggled to rebuild. The refugees included Martha Henderson and her 3 children, who had lost the boarding house to fire, the Patterson family, William with a broken arm from a fallen beam, his wife Sarah, and their 2 teenage sons, old Benjamin Cross, 73, who had been staying at the boarding house, the Miller sisters, Ruth and Rebecca, 19 and 17, who had been working when the store collapsed. Ruth with a gash Elias stitched closed the way he once had for Duke, and others, each with faces, names, and stories. All of them alive because a boy had watched a train car shed snow and thought bigger. For 14 days they shared meals, warmth, and hope. Elias led work parties to dig out the town, salvage what could be saved, and begin rebuilding what could not. Duke moved among the refugees like a quiet guardian, offering comfort, letting children bury tear-streaked faces in his fur when they cried for lost homes. "That dog is worth his weight in gold," Martha Henderson said one evening, watching Duke let her youngest use him as a pillow. "He knows exactly who needs him most," Elias replied. "He's always been like that. Found me when I needed finding. Guess he does the same for everyone." "And what about you?" Martha turned to him. "Who found you?" "Nobody," Elias said matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "I found myself. Built myself. Same way I built this place. You built something extraordinary, you know. This shelter, I've never seen anything like it. It's just engineering. A shell over a cabin. Nothing special. It's special because you thought of it," Martha smiled, "and because you shared it when you didn't have to. That's not engineering. That's character." Elias didn't know how to answer that, so he nodded and went to check the fire. By January, the town was recovering. The general store had been rebuilt, smaller, simpler, but functional. Families who had lost homes were raising new ones, working together in ways Cold Creek had never seen before. The crisis had broken down walls between neighbors, forging bonds that held firm long after the snow melted. Martha Henderson organized a quilting circle that became the heart of the town's social life. The Patterson boys, once withdrawn, stepped up as leaders among the young. Old Benjamin Cross, who had expected to end his days alone, found himself claimed by 3 families competing to host him each week. "The storm took things from us," Martha said at the spring gathering, "but it gave us something too. It gave us each other." She looked across the crowd to where Elias stood with Ruth, Duke sitting between them. "And it gave us him, the boy who built a shell and then filled it with people who needed saving." Elias felt his face flush. He still wasn't used to gratitude, to being seen as more than the crazy boy with strange ideas. Ruth squeezed his hand. "Get used to it," she whispered. "You're a hero now, whether you like it or not. I just built a building. You built a sanctuary. There's a difference." 3 families had already asked Elias to teach them the arch design. "The design isn't complicated," Elias told Thomas Reed, who had become one of his most eager students. "Curved panels, strong anchors, good drainage. The hard part is believing it'll work." "I didn't believe it," Thomas admitted. "I thought you were a fool. I know I was wrong." He extended his hand. Elias shook it. "Apology accepted. Now, let's talk about where you want your arch." Spring brought transformation. By May, 4 new arch shelters stood in the Cold Creek Valley. By the following winter, 11. The design spread beyond the town, carried by travelers who had seen Elias's creation and couldn't stop talking about the boy who built armor for his cabin. Elias trained apprentices, teaching anyone willing. He charged only for materials, never for knowledge. "You could be rich," Henry Wallace told him. "Patent it, charge fees, build a business." "I could," Elias agreed. "But then some family who couldn't pay would try to survive without it, and maybe they wouldn't." His jaw set. "Money's not worth that. Your father would have taken the money." "My father isn't here," Elias said quietly. "And I'm not him." Elias wrote everything down: detailed plans, material lists, construction steps, common mistakes. He bound the pages into small books and gave copies freely. The books passed hand to hand, copied and recopied, and carried to mining camps, ranches, and homesteads across the territory. Letters arrived from strangers thanking him for designs that had saved their families. A Helena newspaper called him the Shell Builder. A mining company offered him a high-paying job designing worker shelters. He turned them all down. "I have everything I need," he told Ruth one evening, sitting on the porch inside their arch, watching snow slide harmlessly off the steel above. "A home, a purpose, and someone to share it with. What else is there?" "Children," Ruth said, her hand resting on her stomach. "Eventually." Elias's eyes widened. "Are you?" She smiled. "You're going to be a father." He pulled her close, words failing him. Duke pressed against them both, tail wagging, somehow knowing something wonderful had happened. Henry studied the young man, 18 now, respected across the territory, engaged to Ruth Miller, who had never forgotten the steady hands that stitched her wound while the world collapsed outside. "No," Henry said finally. "You're definitely not him. Thank God for that." Duke died in the autumn of 1897, old, gray, and content. Elias found him in his usual spot by the stove, peaceful, as if he had simply decided his work was done. The cabin felt emptier than any storm had ever made it. The silence where Duke's breathing should have been louder than wind. He buried him at the arch entrance, where the dog had kept watch over construction, over refugees, and over the life they built. The whole town attended, not just for a remarkable dog, but for what he represented. Loyalty that stayed when reason said leave, quiet faith that someone you love is doing something important. "He found me when I needed finding," Elias said at the grave. "He stayed when everyone else left. He believed in this place before anyone else did, including me, some days." Ruth stood beside him, hand in his. "He was the best dog I've ever known. He was the best friend." Elias placed a hand on the marker. Duke. He kept watch. 1885 to 1897. Elias Harlan lived in his arch shelter until 1953, passing at 78. By then the design had spread across Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, and parts of Canada. Thousands of families protected by variations of his original shell, turning deadly winters into manageable seasons. They called them Harlan Arches, despite his protests that he had only copied railroad ideas and common sense. The name stuck anyway, synonymous with survival through foresight. He and Ruth raised 4 children under the arch, each learning steelwork before reading. Their grandchildren scattered across the West, carrying the knowledge, building shelters for families they would never meet. Elias's funeral procession passed through the original arch, steel weathered, patches of rust showing through worn galvanization, yet still solid, still doing its job after 62 years. His grandson delivered the eulogy. "My grandfather came to Cold Creek with $17 and a dog. Everyone thought he was crazy. Everyone said his idea would fail. He built it anyway. When the worst storm in 20 years tried to destroy this town, his shelter was the only thing standing." He looked over the crowd filling the arch and spilling into the snow beyond. But he didn't just build a shelter. He built a community. When people needed help, he gave it freely. When they wanted to learn, he taught without price. When they were cold, scared, and hopeless, he opened his door and said, "Come in. There's room." The grandson placed a hand on the casket. The arches he designed will outlast us all. But the example he set, the kindness, the generosity, the belief that we're all in this together, that's the legacy that truly matters. He stepped back. Rest now, grandfather. Duke is waiting, and the shelters will stand. The original arch still stands today. The cabin inside has been rebuilt twice and updated with modern comforts, but the steel shell is original. The same panels Elias hauled from that abandoned mine in 1891. Still curved, still strong, still protecting whatever lies beneath. Visitors come sometimes, to stand where 18 survived the blizzard of 1891, to touch the metal a 15-year-old shaped because he watched a train car shed snow and thought bigger. At the entrance stand 3 markers: Elias Harlan, 1876 to 1953. He built the shell so others could build the home. Ruth Miller Harlan, 1874 to 1961. She saw what he could become. Duke, 1885 to 1897. He kept watch. Every winter, when storms rage and snow piles high and wind tries to tear the world apart, the arch sheds its load and stands firm. Inside, the cabin stays warm. Inside, people stay safe. A shell over a home. A simple idea that changed everything. That was Elias's gift to the world. And the world has never forgotten. That was the complete story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next ones. We'll meet again on Hill Destiny with another tale. Take care.